Hello, Imperfect Leaders. I'm so excited. My new book, An Imperfect Leader, Human-Centered Leadership and After Action, is available now. You can order it by going to Amazon, Barnes & Noble. In fact, I've seen it online at lots of bookstores, and I'm told that ordering early is an important part of this book publishing process. So thank you for your support. When I first became a superintendent, I was so proud of myself for memorizing my back-to-school message for our administrators. Close to 200 people in the room, and I didn't even have copies of the PowerPoint available because I was going to wow them with my ability to talk about our goals. And I began listing them off, all 8 of them. 8! Which is too many goals. Way too many goals. When you're focused on 8 things, you are focused on nothing. So there I was, listing them all off and then wondering why, when I was visiting buildings, why no one seemed to know our goals. Leaders were like, wasn't graduation rate in there? Or one was like, oh, discipline, right? Discipline's in there, right? So when my guest today reminded me about the importance of saying things more than once and being really clear, I loved her metaphor of cleaning a window. You'll have to listen to understand what I mean. But it made me groan inside when I was thinking back to that moment, and gosh, how I wish I could go back 10 years and give my past self some important advice. I mentioned this to my guest at some point, and she directed me to a resource that she's rolling out on her website. Beth Napleton is my guest. She has a leadership quiz to help leaders. You can go to leadership-quiz.com. I put the address in the episode notes. Really grateful for her time. Thanks for tuning in. Today on An Imperfect Leader, Beth Napleton, a Chicago-based executive leadership coach, consultant, and the owner and co-founder of Beth Napleton Consulting, is my guest. Now, there are a lot of us out there offering to help school leaders. But what I like about Beth's focus is that she leverages her extensive experience in education to help leaders, and in her own words, clear out the adult problems that get in the way of student success. Beth is a national award-winning teacher and has been in the education field for over 20 years, having trained close to 2,000 teachers and leaders to success. Most recently, she served as founder and CEO of a small charter school network on the south side of Chicago that opened in 2013. All graduates of her schools, most of them first-generation students, were accepted to four-year colleges. Beth Napleton, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
It's so nice to be here. Thank you for having me, Peter.
Oh, I love your energy. So, Beth, we've never met each other, but one of the things I have so appreciated about this podcast is really the ability to talk with school and district leaders about their experiences navigating complex systems. You know, being the founder and CEO of a network of charter schools tells me that you really do understand complex systems. And you understand that sometimes the people in our systems, ourselves included, we get stuck. So I'm wondering, would you talk a little bit about what you've learned about helping the people you coach, how to clear, again, in your words, adult problems that get in the way of student success? Tell us about that.
Well, it's so funny, Peter, you say this with adult problems, because as I've started using and talking about this, and I asked people, when I say adult problems that get in the way of students learning, they're like, I know exactly what you mean. No school leader, no superintendent, no CEO has ever said to me, what do you mean by that? And so I think that, you know, it is something that all of us face, right? We're mission-driven organizations. There's something that we want to accomplish. It's lofty. It's trying to get the world to a more equitable and just place. And we need people to get there, right? It's not as easy as an app or a formula or an algorithm. And so, but people are human and they are complex and they bring all their fears and hopes and dreams and baggage and humanity and lives coming to the issue. And there can be a lot that happens in schools with low morale, team dysfunction, adult infighting. I mean, often the behaviors that I'm a middle school person, like at heart, really. And a lot of that middle school. I would tell you that there's a special place in heaven for kindergarten teachers and anything middle school. Well, I was a pandemic kindergarten teacher to my twins, so I am with you on that. It was brutal. But it really was, you know, middle school behaviors, right? Like the gossip, the infighting, the who said what. I mean, you see a lot of that in adults in schools, right? And so really when leaders are trying to lead their buildings or their districts or their networks to the mission, often they're really stymied by adults not getting along, people not clear on this. It's not my job. This shouldn't be my job. And so I try and come in and help leaders say, okay, what can we do to make sure that the road to reaching your mission is going to be difficult. We're up against a lot of systemic issues in our society that make it hard to deliver on the promises we hope to for youth. But the people in our buildings should not be one of those obstacles. And so how can we make sure that that's not the case?
Maybe we can unpack this just a little bit, because I imagine there are a number of tools and approaches and exercises that you do with a leader who is looking at their organization and understanding that every building you walk into has its own cultural field. And those who are wanting to begin to shift that field, there's probably some first steps that they might take to do that. Is there advice that you might give those who are listening, who are driving right now to their district office or their building, thinking, what might be something I can do with my own faculty or my own core team, administrative team, that might begin to shift from, as I think it's Patrick Lencioni writes about, like, be the difference between a smart team, lots of talented people, and a healthy team, those who know how to work together and have that psychological safety.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that a few things come to mind. So one is, I always tell people, your organization is really special, but it's not unique. So whatever the challenges you're facing with adult infighting or low culture or people, all of that, like, somebody has faced before, right? And is probably experiencing, like, within a couple miles of where you are. And so in some ways, I find that brings leaders a lot of comfort, because the job is so isolating and can feel so lonely. And of course, there are particulars of your situation that are important to acknowledge and recognize, and the exact dynamic of factors. But big pictures, these problems are not unique. I always start my work with leaders, whether it's coaching or coach-sulting, which is my favorite way to work with leaders, which is kind of a combination of coaching and consulting, right? With like a current state analysis, like, where are things at? And, clearly, like, look, when people bring me on board, we like do some focus groups and interviews and surveys, and like, people bring me in for the objective perspective and thoroughness. But I always tell people, you can do this at your desk, like, sit down, get a blank sheet of paper out, and like, what's the current state of affairs? And everything counts. Sometimes you'll say, oh, it's not quantitative. Like that feeling of like feeling like you want to throw up when you walk in, that counts. That's data. Right? It might not be hard quantitative data, but it is your body telling you something, right? The number of people who smile in the hallway, right? That's data, right? The feedback on the survey, how quickly people leave at 3 p.m. I mean, everything can be, obviously there's a rich, you are never at a loss for information. And sometimes sitting down and just saying on a legal pad or on a Post-it note or writing yourself a voice note on your phone, here's what's happening today. Here's the current state of affairs. Seeing that all on a piece of paper can then sometimes help you to like zoom out and look back and say, okay, so like, given this, like, what's the first step? Do I need more help? Is it actually like, it's really just in this wing that it's a real problem? Is it that I'm exhausted when I come in the building? So part of the reason I'm dreading it is because I just feel so tired, and that's a real issue. And so I think that we always want to start with a current state analysis, even if it's as informal as writing a list down on a piece of paper. And I think sometimes leaders all say, well, I need to get outside validation. And I'm like, give your team surveys. You can do this exercise with your leadership team. And then all of a sudden you have 5-10 voices at the table saying, here's where we're at right now, to kind of gather the data. And that counts. And that's enough, right? You don't need to wait for like some perfect output and analysis and whatever. You've got the information you need to help you figure out the next step, which is all you need right now. You don't need the whole path necessarily.
Yes, I think that's great advice. I think also, and I imagine you do this with the people that you're coaching, is that there are times of the year where things are more, where the feelings of despair or excitement, depending on where you are, that there are times in the year where those are most accentuated or you sense them more. And so there's a systems thinking tool called behavior over time graphs, where the x-axis is the time of the year. So you might do a logical school year, August through June. And then the y axis is whatever it is that you're trying to measure. So you use the example of morale, and then looking at where is morale the highest. Typically it's like, we're coming back to school, we're all really excited, we're going to get our class list, we're having our back to school nights, all those kind of things.
I love my job.
Right? February.
Not that.
Where we are right now, sort of in the spring where you are in Chicago, where it's like, is summer ever going to come, or spring ever going to come?
And it's like, you've got so much to do. The end of the year is far. Spring break just passed. Yes.
So how are people feeling? Right. And then begin working with your teams, whether that's your core team or the staff and faculty at a building, to say, well, we know this is what happens at this part of the year.
Yes.
So what might be some things that we can do? Yeah,
totally. No, absolutely. October is another one. The October slump is real, right? And some people slump harder than others, right? Absolutely. And so some of it is knowing that. I love that tool. And I love how it also enables leaders to detach a little bit, because sometimes it can be like, oh my gosh, that's February and no one's well, that's always how it is in February.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't mean you can't do things to help, but like there are just rhythms to the year that in some ways acknowledging them really can be empowering as a leader.
Yeah. You made me think of it when you said, you are special, but you're not unique, right? We're all in public education sort of having those same slumps.
Yes.
In the leadership model that I use to advise others, there's this dimension in the model called the leader's learning work. And that's really like the mind of an organization's work. And inside that dimension is a term, serving as the lead learner. And what I mean by that is that leaders have two important responsibilities. The first is that they must learn alongside their colleagues. Like, don't send people to a training that you yourself are not willing and excited to be a part of. The second, and even more important, to be a lead learner means to be vulnerable, to admit that you've made a mistake. And Beth, when I was reading your 2 secrets that leaders need to know in order to be their best selves, I felt as if you were talking about being a lead learner. And I wonder, would you describe the top 2 often unexpected secrets to being a successful school leader?
Absolutely. Well, I love that model. And I am thinking about the times that initiatives really took off in my building because I was at that training or I had done some of that work, and then times they did not because maybe I sent someone and you figure it out. So I think there's a lot that really resonates there. I think that, first and foremost, it is so important, and this word can get kind of overused sometimes, but it doesn't make it any less important. And that is, it's important to be an authentic leader. And, who you are, what you care about, and being able to, know what your strengths are and sit in those. And I think that this is, this can be a hard thing. Some people think, well, shouldn't being authentic come easily to me? Like, I am who I am. But who we are as a principal or as a superintendent or as a CEO is different than who we are as a friend or a parent or a partner. And so sometimes people struggle with, now that I'm in the leadership seat, shouldn't I be super official? And, is it okay for me to be excited about my favorite sports team or cheer on my alma mater or whatever, because we just as humans have so many archetypes about what leadership should be that they can sometimes be like a psychological straitjacket on us. And so I really work with leaders and think about, how do you operate in a place of ease, excellence, enjoyment? So sometimes I'm a Gallup strengths coach is one of the things I do. And often if I've started working with someone, we'll do a strengths assessment and it focuses you on the things that are going right. And helps you. And to me, what I like is it really enables authenticity, because if you are someone who has a lot of strategic in your top 5 strengths, you are going to lead differently than somebody who has a lot of influence. And that's okay. You shouldn't all operate the same way. And if you are strategic trying to be influencing, all you will be is tired at the end of the day from trying to do something that doesn't come naturally to you. There are lots of great ways to lead. And when you know yourself and you can kind of operate from that place, it's really going to help you. So I think that's my first tip. And it's harder than it sounds, right? And so I want to acknowledge that this isn't just it's day 2. I figured out how to be an authentic leader. And it also evolves over time, right? As you have more time in an organization, maybe as other identities in your life change. So I think that it's, always a good place for leaders to check in with themselves. Do I feel like I can really be my authentic self? And if not, what's blocking me and how do I kind of work past it?
Before you go to the second one, I keyed in on something at the end, which is that regular check-in on where am I in terms of who I am. And I looking back on my own leadership, there were times whether you're a building principal or a superintendent, you are focused on trying to at least find common ground where there are lots of perspectives being presented to you. And sometimes you work so hard to find common ground that when you do look back, you sometimes are not, as you look in the mirror, you're saying, I'm not sure I am exactly who I want to be at this moment. Mm-hmm. And maybe this is my own sort of, you're going to help, the fact that you're a coach and a leadership coach, that now I'm going to engage in my own sort of therapy session with you. But it's sort of how do I make sure that I'm regularly making sure that whether you call it a North Star or your compass or where you've anchored yourself, that you stay true to who you are and what you believe. Mm-hmm. And it will sort of manifest in the way that you make decisions.
Absolutely. And I think that, look, we all learn as we go, right? Or hopefully that's the goal, right? Is a culture of learning and leadership. And so I think it's really real that, year 5 in a job is going to look different than year 3 in year 1. And sometimes we look in that proverbial mirror and we're like, I swung the pendulum too hard in one direction. I need to swing it back. or this isn't actually what I believe anymore, as I've learned more from the research or from best practice or from what's happened in the world in the past, few years. And so I think that sometimes leaders then feel stuck, which is often where they will engage a coach or someone to come in or talk to valued colleagues and say like, hey, this actually is not jiving. How do I get to actually closer to who I really am right now and who I want to be? And sometimes it's, and like, how can I say this to my team? And so we work through all those challenges. What do I do? What do I want? And some, even a lot of times with leaders, like they'll engage me to work because I know that I need to work on, let's say, internal leadership development. And it becomes clear in the current state analysis that they're actually not 100% sure what they think. And so a lot of times we'll start our engagement. Sometimes we'll exclusively focus an engagement on getting to helping the leader develop a clear North Star, because then once you have that, you can work with your team, we can supercharge it, we can go from there, but you need to have that yourself. And it can be hard to find the time to think and reflect in that way as a leader, because there are so many things, emails coming in and things on your to-do list and people knocking on your door.
Well, and leaders don't think of themselves as deserving or entitled to having a coach. And you think about musicians, you think about athletes, you think about every one of these high-performing individuals, CEOs of other large organizations, have coaches.
Yes.
And then we think, well, I'm just so happy to be here. I probably don't need a coach. And if I do ask for a coach, someone's going to find out that I don't know exactly what I'm doing. And you know what? Join the group and recognize that there's real value in getting that coaching to help you think through, what is my compelling purpose? Okay, so what's the second tip?
Well, that was such a perfect cue up, because really, I think the second piece is we're so aligned on this, is it is essential for leaders to invest in themselves. And so I find this, and I think especially leaders of schools and nonprofits, right? We see a number on a piece of paper from a quote, and we think, oh, this could buy so many books. We could have a pair in the lunchroom. I could solve so many problems with this money. It shouldn't be on my development. Whereas if you zoom up for the 20,000 foot view and you think, I want to influence education, I've got a school building full of people, and I could put all my chips on one domino, what domino are you going to pick? I'm going to pick the principal, right? Because the principal, and that gets to your point with the lead learner piece, when the principal is invested and they're developed and they're trained, they can help lead others, and you can topple all the other dominoes that will get you to student achievement. Ironically, sometimes the principal will say, no, I'm going to send the English department chair. Oh, I can't do that many trainings. And it's like, I wish that, if I had to pick one person in a district, it would be the superintendent. Now, should you have to pick one person? No, right? Either can lots of people get development? Yes, this is not the Hunger Games of development. What I try to tell leaders is think of your most valuable employees, and they'll think of a little mental list. And then I'll say, okay, did you put yourself on that list? What, me? It's like, well, you know what? Yeah, absolutely, right? You are the leader of this organization, and any school board, any, board of directors, local school council, you name it, will tell you with great enthusiasm about how important it is to retain school leadership and retain district leadership, and how much that consistency matters for kids and that stability over time. And so if getting a coach, or if you need some extra time, it's getting a coach to help figure through this. If you need some help getting some capacity by hiring consultants, if that's going to help you be more effective in your role and feel like it's more sustainable for the long term, I just don't think there's a number that any school board would blink at spending, right? But often we hold ourselves back as leaders on our own.
Beth, I'd like to ask you a question that I ask of every guest who comes on the podcast. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
I love it. And because I don't know a perfect leader. And it's interesting, right? Because I think when we're looking from the outside, we think, oh, so-and-so is a perfect leader. They're the ideal leader. They're the leader archetype. But really, if you talk to any of those people, and I kind of joke about sometimes having celebrity mentors, I'll look at people or look at leaders and read books and pretend that we're actually friends. Michelle and Bob and I aren't friends, but I think we're friends because I read all her books and I take all her readings to my life. If you look at any of those folks, or any of the people we think of as perfect leaders, they're the first to tell you, hey, here's where I fell short. Here's where I could do better. I wish I hadn't done it this way. Every one of us is just doing the best we can. And so, what we can do is get up and keep learning and keep reflecting and growing, so that we can just do better tomorrow than we did today, right? I mean, that's kind of the end goal. And it's not linear. There's hills and valleys to that too. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But, I think Nelson Mandela said, I either win or I learn, right? And that's exactly it. We're going to learn on this journey as we go on.
And we'll be right back. An Imperfect Leader is brought to you by EdConnective, whose mission is to ensure student success through transformative teacher training. EdConnective helps teachers move from awareness about strategies and frameworks to successful and consistent implementation. Their friendly coaches celebrate classroom success with teachers, and with concrete classroom data, support teachers in their growth, one step at a time. I've been thinking about this a lot. During the pandemic, student teachers didn't get a chance to do their student teaching with children. They just started teaching in classrooms. And they need help. Across the nation, states are adopting higher expectations to make up for learning loss. That's where EdConnective fits in. Their vision is that every student deserves a great teacher, and every teacher deserves a great coach. Find out more by contacting them at edconnective.com. We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. Beth Napleton, a Chicago-based executive leadership coach, consultant, and the owner and co-founder of Beth Napleton Consulting, is my guest. And in this segment, Beth, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they had to make, and then we discuss it. So what happened?
So I want to take you back to a time when the charter school network I had was growing. We were growing from middle school to high school. So we have been one building. We were going to be two. We were, high school has all sorts of different requirements, right? And is just much more complex. And to put it clearly, my team was a hot mess, right? I had hired a principal who was great and who I really believed in to become our high school principal and help us grow. And an assistant principal who did not want the role and did not apply for it, really disagreed with her, did not want this. And there was a lot of backstabbing, gossip, staff factions, frustrating meetings. And it felt, spinning our wheels when we in fact had a building to open with a new high school, with a ninth grade. And what were we going to do? And so I kind of got really fed up one night. And one thing I had learned by then in my leadership journey was that writing can be a really powerful tool to communicate expectations and beliefs to people because they can read it on their own. They can take it at their own pace. I can work on my language in a way that is harder when I'm speaking off the cuff. And so I just got really fed up and I opened a Google Doc and I started writing what was basically a manifesto that became like
it's your Jerry Maguire moment.
It was. And it was very I literally titled it the manifesto, where I realized we had been in operation for about 5 years. And even in that short time, people became very attached to how we did things and the way it was. And when somebody came in with some new ideas, they had a hard time with it. Whereas I could see, well, of course you have new ideas. Our high school should be different than our middle school. We're learning as we grow. We're this culture. I realized that it was on me as the founder and CEO to connect a lot of the dots in these pieces. What's our vision? What's our mission? What are our beliefs? What are our core values? How do we define those core values? How do we define courage? What does it mean in a school setting? What does it mean you're doing? What does it mean you're not doing? And what does it mean you're doing if you're a student? What does it mean you're not doing? And so really, I ended up being a 98-page bound book from Kinko's that I think it was the Thursday before spring break. I was like, great news, everyone. You also have spring break homework reading and everybody needs to read this over break. And it really was this kind of moment where it started in this kind of pre-spring break of this school year and continued really for the rest of my time, but certainly heavily focused on the next academic year, where it was really trying to do a big cultural reset and getting everybody on the same page and moving in the same direction.
I can imagine those who are listening have had their own similar experiences, whether they have assumed a new role, a new leadership role, and they are trying to navigate an existing culture and beliefs, or they're expanding to new programs and they're trying to consider how they're going to move forward. In your case, you're talking about a relatively new, what you said, about 5 years or so in terms of how long.
5 years of the doors open. Yeah.
Right. And so it's hard to say, well, this is how we've always done it. Although I'm sure that you've experienced where that is exactly how some of the feedback you were getting. So I'm curious, what got overlooked?
So I think that, I was really fired up about getting this out for the current, I had all these issues bubbling up with my current team, right? And so I was really fired up about getting this out before the end of the school year, because I wanted to be very clear to people, this is what we're about. And if you really have problems with this direction, and I did office hours and Q&As and all staff PD, I can just hand it to them and say, if you don't agree with this, you're out. But I want you to understand this, and I want you to make an informed choice to return next year based on this, because this is where we're going. This is the direction we're headed in. And if this is not for you, then we should have a different conversation. And it's not every school is not for every person, right? And it is absolutely every school is not for every person at every stage of their life. And so I think that what I overlooked, I think I put this whole thing together in 6 weeks. And so I was like up writing at like 4 a.m. when I couldn't, find the time. I was so fired up. So what really got overlooked was, I think, getting others' input. And so I think I ran it by some people, but not others. And in retrospect, I think I would have, maybe carved out time to get some people to like focus group it. I think I would have run some stuff by parents. I would have brought in more external eyes, particularly when I look at it now, there's parts that I'm like, ooh, this needs some explanation. This isn't super clear. And I think I was like so myopic in my view of getting this done and out that I didn't bring in enough other perspectives. And I think it would have made it a stronger and better project had more people weighed in.
The idea that you make decisions with the people most impacted by that decision.
I do think sometimes as a leader, it's important to say, hey, here's what we're about. So like, let me be clear. So I want your reactions and your thoughts, but partly is like a red light, green light to me to gauge, like, oh, that's not really clear, oh, like you're
right.
bringing.
What do you mean by this? Right.
Yes, exactly. And so I think it was this interesting piece where it was okay for me to say like, no, this is what we're about, right? I'm the founder, I've been doing this, and I could have brought in a lot more voices to say, where can we flesh this out? Where is this unclear? What am I missing here? I brought in a few, but not enough. So
what did you learn about relationships, or what new relationships were formed?
So 2 things. One is that I had a board member who had recently joined the board, who later looked at that over the summer and who was able to make some really great suggestions. And it was really, really helpful. And she was very thoughtful. And so I think that it reminded me of how important it is to ask for help from people who are there to help you. I think sometimes people like are fearful of their boards, and sometimes for good reason. They've had like kind of weird experiences, but it really...
Or they were never trained on how to partner with their board.
Yes.
It's not a
100%.
part of the leadership trajectory where you pause and say, okay, you're the employee of this board, or this board is installed to be your support. They represent the community, and yet we don't always know what that relationship is supposed to be like. And so I can certainly relate to this idea that in my first year as superintendent, I almost just tolerated the board. Like, I'll see you at the meetings, we'll set the agenda together, but I'll see you there, which was such a mistake as I look back on sort of the end of my years as a superintendent, and what a close relationship that was, and how you can actually further your goals, because again, they represent the community. So they're out there as some of your biggest supporters, explaining why you're moving in the direction you're moving. So what did you learn about relationships? Sorry to interrupt.
So, and then the second piece, no, I think that's exactly right. And it's such a huge piece of this is like, I think sometimes it's that zooming out, it's that learning. And again, but to your point, this is like, nobody's ever, that would be a great idea to give people a toolbox with this. I mean, the other piece is that people, and I think especially when it comes to relationships with the leader, people really value clarity. I have never heard anyone ever say that leader is too clear for me, right? Sometimes they say, oh, they give so many details, they go into minutia, they whatever. But people really value and crave and need clarity. And it actually is a gift that you can give people as a leader. And so one of the things I'll sometimes do with my clients as we talk about like, your stating your expectations or defining things or, communicating an important concept, it's like you have to Windex it, right? No, like my windows don't look dirty right now, but I guarantee if I went out and got some Windex and wiped it down, they would shine a little brighter. And then if I waited an hour and did it again, they would be brighter still. There's always room to make my window more clear because I live in downtown Chicago. Specks of dust get on them all the time. And so I think it's the same thing with expectations. It's the same thing with what you're doing. And what I really saw is that for so many people and so much the squabbling and this infighting, this distracting adult stuff, people came back and read that. And the vast majority of a lot of them are like, oh, this is super helpful. Thanks. I didn't know this. And of course I would be thinking, oh, we talked about this in PD and we did this orientation, whatever. But, it turns out just because you say something once in August doesn't mean that people really like keep it on them forever. And so as a leader, you're constantly repeating yourselves. You're constantly hitting the same points to really help it get through these, large and complex systems. And so I think that really hammered home the message for me of how much people value clarity.
What frustrated you?
I am by nature, I am a sensitive person, right? Like I can get my feelings hurt kind of easily. And that is hard as a leader because it is pretty easy to get your feelings hurt. So I think I felt like there were definitely people who grumbled about it, who didn't want spring break reading, who felt like it was too long, who would be like, this part could be better. And, I was frustrated by that. And, I think I always tell my leaders that I work with that, when I go to Wrigley Field and sit in like the nosebleed seats, it's like the advice is easy from the cheap seats, right? You should do this, you should do that, you should do that. And I'm sure that if I were ever the Cubs manager and down in the dugout, it would be a lot more complex the closer you are to the challenge. And so I think that it really, it was frustrating to have that kind of criticism, but also I had felt that moment when I opened that Google Doc, I knew that we had to change something. And so I felt like, well, at least I did something. So like, it's not perfect, but PS, nothing's ever perfect about what you do as a leader. And so we're just going to keep it moving and move it forward from here. But I really did. My feelings were hurt a little bit.
What a perfect metaphor. I love that in terms of a baseball game. I like to use the one of you're in the mezzanine in an auditorium and there are those who are on the dance floor and you can criticize the choreography until you're actually down there dancing with them.
Right.
Like, this is actually really hard.
This is harder than it looks.
Right, but I love the baseball metaphor, which is super. Yeah, and if for those who are familiar with Wrigley, which is one of the only old stadiums that still has like the really long bars where your ticket will tell you have an obstructed view, and you're like, how bad could it be? And then you're just like, oh, I
am looking at a post.
So I imagine that some of those people who were criticizing from the nosebleeds also had an obstructed view, so they didn't get to see the full picture of what you were trying to achieve. So sometimes I ask, I always ask, what got overlooked? And then sometimes that's different from what could you have done differently? Because sometimes the overlooked part is the system, had some issues that sort of got overlooked. And I'm curious, do you have a different perspective in terms of like, what could you have done differently?
I think that, what I found myself at the time and even now, and this is maybe something leaders experience all over, is like, I wish I had done this 3 years ago. You know what I mean? I wish I had done this 4 years ago. And it really took me a little while to forgive myself for, hey, I was the founder of the school. It started as an idea. This is an example where I could have done this, right? I mean, so many people, it's like, oh, well, I couldn't have been here. This district's been around for 200 years. Like, it's always been a thing. But I've had to really forgive myself for that, which I think was actually an important muscle to develop as a leader, is that sense of it. And, clearly I could have done it in the school year. I could have done it here. All of our hiring materials already were aligned to it, but could have been more so. And it's like, in some ways, I just had to embrace the wisdom of Dr. Maya Angelou, which is like, look, when we know better, we do better. Once I figured out we needed it, I did it. And I can't be mad at my past self because she was pretty busy trying to get a school started. And so she did the best she could. I'm doing the best I can today. And so I think that was something that I had to really come to embrace in this experience.
In the end, what would you say was something that was good that came out of this situation?
I think it was a real moment for our organization that just helped us get unstuck. And it set what I loved about the piece and the document and the manual and the foundation was that it gave us a touch point that we used through the end of my tenure, which was 5 years later. I mean, even now they use it, right? And so continue to do PD and focus on different areas and different core values. And so I think that it was a really profound lesson in how sometimes as leaders, our work is like really going back and getting the foundation right. And that can be hard work. You don't really want to do it, right? It's like, we have so many other things that are kind of here and urgent.
Well, it's not as attractive either, right? Because when you're investing in that foundational work, it takes time and it isn't easily seen.
And it's complicated, right? I mean, I've never had, thank God, a house with a cracked foundation, but I have friends who have, and it's really hard to jack the whole house up and re-pour the cement and do this. And you're basically doing that with your organization. I mean, it both helped, the team stuff didn't clear up immediately, right? But I'd say within the next year it did, right? We kind of started to work, and that was the foundation we went back to. We had a clear vision for our high school. It helped inform what we were doing, what we weren't doing. And so I think that it was really helpful to have everyone, and reminded me about how important that foundational work is, and how, honestly, the fact that it was in writing was helpful, because I wasn't going back to the drawing board every year. I was able to hand a copy of it to every new staff member. We had a quiz online they took to make sure they read it, right? Then we did a PD where we always did it every year. When people say we did this last year, I said, well, great news. Our core values are still in fashion. So here we go.
I imagine also, there's a story about the man or the individual who falls in a hole, and people keep walking by and they don't have time to help the person get out of the hole. And the person jumps in the hole and says, what are you doing? Why are you in the hole with me? He goes, oh, I've been down this hole before and I know the way out. And I imagine similarly, had you not had this experience, you may not be in the position where you are now in terms of impacting thousands of teachers and leaders in terms of when they're stuck and being able to speak, through not just empathize with their situation, but really demonstrate compassion, being with them because you've lived it. And I imagine that's also something that's good that's come out of this experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
My guest again was Beth Napleton. And Beth, there are school and district leaders all over the country listening to An Imperfect Leader, and they often reach out to share their new learning or their reflections, or they offer advice to me or to my guests. So, as they come in, I'll forward them to you. But I suspect I will hear from a few who you've nudged as they think about the adult problems that might be serving as barriers, or their thoughts on the 2 secrets of success, including the value of clarity and what a gift that is for them. Mostly, I just want to thank you for giving us a good deal to think about. Thanks so much for being my guest.
Thanks for having me. It was so fun.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created the Daruma doll butterfly artwork. Imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It is a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. And I'm proud to be an imperfect leader, so I hope you'll join me next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, Leadership in After Action.